Today's going to be a prickly one because in this episode of Arid Zine, we are exploring everything cactus care. Yes, we're delving into these spiny little friends. Whether you are just beginning your cactus journey, whether you've been around the block a few times and now you want to dip your toes into a few more challenging species, this episode covers it all. We're looking at soil mixes, we're looking at watering, light, heat, fertilizer, all the things that you could possibly need to make your new little cactus friends as happy and healthy as can be. So let's not delay, let's jump right into it, shall we? Now there is a problem with this. The cactus family is enormous. There are thousands and thousands of different species and they all have very different requirements. There's no way we can collapse all of that information into one guide and have it be viable. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to divide all of those plants into two categories. They're going to be the easier growers, like this Cleistocactus tessellatus here, and those that are a little bit more picky in their needs, like this Lophophora williamsii cespitosa, little peyote cactus. When we do that, we'll look at everything about them concurrently. But first I'm going to show you how you can identify which of those two categories your plant might be in, just so you know what sort of care you need to give it. Now there are a few simple ways to figure out whether your plant is one of those easy growing ones or something a little bit more difficult. And maybe the first trick is to think about where you got it from. If you bought it from a mainstream nursery or garden centre, it's more likely to be one of those easier growing plants. They like to grow them rapidly, turn them over quickly, and that's harder to do with your more difficult plants, which are often very slow growing. If you bought it online from a niche nursery or somewhere like that, well, you know, you need to be a little bit more careful about it. Some of those more easy growing plants as well will often have finer root systems, and I'm going to show you what that looks like getting this guy out of its pot. Get it out, get some of this dirt off, and what you'll find is that it won't have a big, thick, swollen taproot, just a fibrous network. It's those taproots that often cause a bit of grief in cultivation. Thick water storage organs. This one, not the case. You're starting to get a sense of that. You'll see, I'm not being very gentle with the roots, but cacti, they don't really care about that too much. And look at that, look at those roots, nice and fibrous. It means that there's nothing really there to get too caught up if they're stuck in water for extended periods of time, anything like that. I won't do any more, but you get the idea. Nothing massive there under the ground, lurking, ready to rot away if we don't care for it properly. I'll put on the screen now a list of some of the more easy growing cacti. This is certainly not exhaustive by any stretch, and if you're uncertain, it may well pay to use the more hard growing approach that I'm going to share with you today as well, just to be safe. Now the converse, of course, is true of your more difficult plants. We're talking specialist nurseries, online mail order, and physically under the surface of the pot, a thicker, fatter taproot. This little guy here, it's a bit hard to see through that fibrous network, but behind it all, there is that big, juicy water storage root holding it all together. So on the screen now you can see a list of some of those more difficult plants. Plants like your Lophophora, but also Ariocarpus, Turbinicarpus, Copiopoas, Aztekiums, and plants like Astrophytum asterius, which also has that big thick taproot. Now by far the biggest difference in terms of care for your hard growing and your easy growing cacti is in your soil mix. Basically, what you're going to find is that easier growing cacti will tolerate more organic material in their soil. That's that decomposing plant matter. It's the stuff that holds onto and retains moisture and gradually releases a few nutrients into the mix. Basically, your easy growing cacti, they don't mind a little bit more water, whereas your harder growing cacti are going to want more of a customized blend that holds less water and contains more mineral content. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you about the two different mixes that I've put together today. Then we'll pot those two cacti up. Realistically, those pre-bagged cactus mixes that you find at nurseries and hardware stores isn't particularly well suited to cacti, even if they're labelled cacti and succulent mix. What you're going to need to do is cut them down with a good, well-draining mineral component. And the mix that I've put together today for these easier growing plants is a blend. It's about half pre-bagged cactus mix and then half gritty coarse minerals. The minerals that I've used today are pumice, scoria and zeolite. Now, the exact component doesn't really matter. What you really want though are some sort of coarse, nice, chunky minerals. Don't use dusty sand or anything dusty really, because what that will actually do is clog up the mix. It'll actually make it retain moisture more than if you didn't have it in there. So you're going to want a really good, coarse, chunky mineral component. You could just use pumice. A lot of people swear by perlite, and that's okay too. As long as you're cutting your cactus mix in half with some sort of mineral component, your easier growing plants are probably going to be relatively happy. On the other hand, your harder growing cacti, like our little peyote here, are going to demand a more mineral rich soil. They're far more prone to rot if they're exposed to moisture for prolonged periods of time. And so that organic component holding and retaining that moisture isn't doing them any good. You do want some degree of organic content in your mix, but as you can see here, what I've done is I've actually gone for a blend that's 80% coarse mineral with 20% of that organic store-bought stuff. Now some people, some growers will swear by purely mineral content, and that's okay too. Give it a try if you want to, but don't go the other way. Those harder growers need something very, very well draining. And so as you can see, we've got here similar sort of mix, same sort of contents, just smaller organic component, and then we've got that pumice, that zeolite, and that scoria. But again, I'm using the minerals that are easily available to me in my area. You have a look around and see what you can get your hands on and adjust accordingly, as long as it's coarse, chunky, and very well draining. A very quick interjection, but if you're finding all this useful, first of all, hit subscribe. Second of all, you might want to check out one of these very, very sharp Arid-Zine Cactus Club t-shirts. Very, very fashionable, I'll tell you what. There's a link on the screen. Anyway, let's get back to caring for cacti. Once you've got your soil mix put together, the next step, of course, is selecting a pot for your plant. Now, the main thing before we get into anything is that you choose a pot with drainage holes. Without them, water's going to collect at the bottom and you're going to have a waterlogged, soggy mess, fungal infection and a rotten plant in no time. Drainage holes, they're non-negotiable. But beyond that, you've really got two main choices, plastic and terracotta. They've got different water retention properties, and it's well worth knowing about that. Plastic, of course, retains moisture a little bit better. Might impact what sort of soil mix you use. Terracotta, on the other hand, dries out much more quickly because it's porous, and so water can actually evaporate through the terracotta and your soil mix will dry out quite rapidly. Could be a consideration, especially if you're growing those more difficult plants. Me, I like plastic because it just suits my environment here in Sydney, but it's worth experimenting and trying them out, seeing what works best for you. Now, there is one other consideration when it comes to potting your cacti, and that is you'd never want to put them in a pot that is far too big. Again, it's got a lot to do with moisture retention. This is going to be an ideal fit for this plant here. Tall growing plants often enjoy a little bit more root space, whereas my Lophophora is going to go into a pot just bigger than the diameter of the plant. Again, because I don't want those roots sitting in soggy soil for too long. With all that said and done, we've got our plants, we've got our pots, we've got our soil. We're going to pot them up right now. Here we go. So there you go, all potted up, and I've given both plants a nice mineral chunky topsoil, and that's going to enable even watering, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before I get there, we need to find a home for these plants. So we're going to talk about lighting, where best to keep your cacti. Now, I don't know why, But cacti are often marketed as indoor plants, and yet nothing could be further from the truth. Think about it. These are things that are iconic for growing in the desert, where they just get full blasting sun. Now, not every species necessarily needs that full blasting direct light, but one thing is certainly true for all of them: they aren't going to survive happily indoors on your dining table, next to your computer, wherever. They do need exposure to natural light. What you'll find, if they're not getting enough light, is you start getting this long, lanky, stretched growth. It's called etiolation. And the internet is littered with all sorts of horror stories. People who have got these plants in the wrong place and they're sending out these almost tentacle-like growths. What they're doing, they're actually sending out growth, stretching, seeking any semblance of light. Like, please, please, give me what I need. And so what you're going to want to do is always keep these plants well lit. Now, you've got a few different options. Ideally, you grow them outdoors, like I have the luxury of doing. If that's not possible, you're going to want to put them into a windowsill that does get direct sunlight. Or if you're super technical, and I'm not really going to delve into this, but you can grow them under grow lights. You just have to be very attentive to how strong the light is that's hitting the surface of the plant. However, it's not as simple as just taking your cactus and plonking it out into the sun, because these things, like humans, are also prone to sunburn. What you have to do is acclimatize your plant to full direct sun. What happens if you don't? You end up with a plant that is grotesquely scarred like this one. This was a sad mishap where this plant got moved, forgotten, left out, and now has irreparable damage. It's never going to heal from that scar. It's just going to look ugly for the entirety of its life. It's what you get when you forget about moving your plants. So, how do you acclimatize a plant to the sun? It's a gradual process. Essentially, you start by giving it a little bit of sun on the first day, you give it a little bit more sun on the next day, and you build it up like that. Or the alternative is you can drape a bit of shade cloth over them and gradually remove that day by day as well. Your plant's looking very smart in its new pot. You found a beautiful sunny location for it. Let's talk about temperature. Here's the problem. It's almost impossible to categorize cacti based on temperature hardiness, because they come from all sorts of different habitats. Some are from the tropics, some from the frozen expanses, some come from very high altitudes, and others are down near sea level. And of course, all of those different factors have an impact on their cold hardiness. So I'm not going to go into too much detail other than to say my broad piece of advice would be this: keep them above freezing. There are some that will tolerate a frost, others that don't mind just being buried under thick snow. But they're the outliers. Most of these plants are not going to enjoy that. In fact, those sorts of conditions will kill them straight up. I keep my plants outdoors over the winter time. Here in Sydney, temperatures fall to about 3 or 4 degrees at their lowest over winter, and my plants are pretty happy. So keep that in mind. If you can't keep them above zero, you're going to need to find some strategies to overwinter them. Now, here's the thing about temperatures. Cacti go dormant when the temperatures fall. Usually, when those temperatures fall below about a 12 degrees Celsius overnight range, you're going to start finding your plant's metabolism slows right down and they'll stop growing. What that means is that they need less water, which leads us into that next point: watering our cacti. Here's the thing. Our two categories, easy growing and hard growing, come into clear focus once again, because your easy growing cacti are going to be far more tolerant of a bit more moisture and a bit of moisture when those plants are dormant, whereas our hard grown cacti, you make a mistake with watering and that's when you end up with a little puddle of mush. You don't want that. So right now in Sydney, it's winter, my plants are dormant. I am not giving any water whatsoever to that Lophophora. It'll just kill it. It'll get fungal infection and it will die. But the Cleistocactus here is going to be far more tolerant of a bit of water. Now normally I wouldn't give any water to a plant that I had just repotted. So this one isn't going to get that today, but I'll find another plant which I'm going to demonstrate how best to water your cactus. There is a myth around cactus watering, and of course that myth is they don't want any water at all. Now they are succulent plants and they do have fantastic moisture retention abilities. They can survive prolonged drought. It's the wonderful thing about them. You can neglect them and get away with it. But that doesn't mean that they don't want any water whatsoever. In fact, if you've got them in a good soil mix, and you should have because we've talked about that already, if you've got them in a good soil mix, in the warmer months, they'll tolerate quite regular watering. I water my plants here usually twice a week, and that keeps them growing very, very happily. And how much water do I give them? An absolute drenching. Let me demonstrate for you. This is what we do to water a cactus. Now the important thing is, you want to see that water running out of the drainage holes at the bottom, because that tells me that the soil has been saturated right through. All of that root mass is getting access to the water, and you're going to have a very, very happy plant. And the last thing that I want to talk about today in terms of giving you that best advice for cactus care is how to fertilize them. These are plants that don't necessarily need a huge amount of fertilizer, but it will certainly keep them happy. But not all fertilizers are made the same. Without going into too much depth on this, the one thing that you want to ensure is that you get a fertilizer that isn't overloaded with nitrogen. Nitrogen is the element that will cause plants to put on leafy growth. And in most plants that have leaves, that's fantastic. But for cacti, what it will actually do is cause them to grow long, lanky, distorted, and very weak growth. Ideal growth for a cactus is slow, not long and lanky. It'll actually make them more pest prone, less healthy. So you're going to want to look for a fertilizer that isn't overloaded with nitrogen. In Australia, I use this product. It's put out by a company called Searles. It's a slow release thing. Scratch it into the topsoil or mix it into their soil if I'm repotting, and keeps them happy for a season or so. You can also use diluted liquid fertilizer, which works pretty well as well. Just up to you, but the main thing is you don't want to have an overabundance of nitrogen, because the end result is you're just going to have sad, gangly, ugly plants. So that's pretty much it. You follow those steps and you're going to have a pretty happy cactus collection. Now, of course, there are more minute details, little niche things that you might do for some species as opposed to others. But as you experiment and get to know your plants more, those things will start to come into sharper focus. Now, if you've got any questions, fire them into the comments, and you know, if not, very good. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I certainly hope you learned something. And with all that being said, I'm Michael, this is Arid Zine, and that's how you grow a cactus. I hope it works for you. I'll see you next time.